All right, this is the JupyterLab dev meeting, July 22nd. Take it away, Jason.
Why don't we just go straight to Darian, because we know he has something to show us and it's the latest for him. Darian?
Okay, sure. So on Tuesday, I raised the multiple complaints that have come in about tooltips in the console. And I realized the last major bit of the console that we've been waiting for a long time, and I hadn't done yet, is Pager. And I just was thinking about how we're going to deal with both of those things. In addition, last week, one of the people I met was Dino from Microsoft, and we talked a lot about debugging. And so all of these things are actually really closely related, I think. They're all about code introspection. And so I spent this week working on that, coherent interface for that, a way that's good to extend that, and some of the semantics around it. So I'm just going to show you guys what my current outstanding PR about the console pager is, because it involves more than just the pager. And then I would suggest that unless there's some massive thing that bothers you about it, that we merge that and we iterate from there, because it's pretty big, and I think it'll make a lot of complaints go away. Nobody's really happy with the tooltips. But if you hate it, you hate it. All right, so here goes. Okay, can you see my screen? Anyone?
Says you're sharing your screen. Yep.
You may not be able to see us. Yes, we can see your screen.
Yeah, I can't see you, right.
Sorry, we're all nodding our heads.
I can see you.
Okay, cool. So I am in my local running JupyterLab, and I've only done this for console, but actually this is written in a way that we can extend pretty easily for notebook as well. So here we go. This is a console that's been launched, and what's new is that sidebar, which has 2 tabs in it by default. What we used to call hints, tooltips, I call hints, and what we used to call pager, I'm calling details, because I think I don't think people really know what pager means once it's in this context. But
yeah,
okay,
I agree.
So here's what happens if I actually do a pager. Now the issue, the thing that you might have seen happen is it switched to the white one. It switched over from hints to details. Basically, when you add different inspectors, that's what these tabs are, they're inspectors. When you add different inspectors, you give them a rank, and details always has a higher rank than tooltips, because details is always something that was initiated by a user action. So you can imagine some other inspector that we add that's also important and might have a better rank or whatever, but for the default 2 inspectors are tooltips and details. So we have, just a scrollable thing here. It's a split panel, so you can resize it. And I've built this ability to toggle, so you can put it on the bottom if you prefer. These arrows, we don't yet have a way to disable stuff in the toolbar, but I will soon. Currently, they should all 3 be disabled. One is your clear history, and the other is to navigate back and forth, because details are things you ask for. So I've actually enabled history in this particular inspector. But you'll see that the hints inspector doesn't have those buttons. It just has the toggle back and forth button. So how does hints work? So right now, the last thing I asked for, the result of the last command is still going to show up. So even though there's a tooltip for print, you're not going to see it because you explicitly asked for something. But if I switch over, I will see it. And actually, if I go back here, and I run one more command, now neither one of them has precedence, because details is empty. So now you will see any tooltip that would have come up, and similarly, any subsequent tooltip. Really helpful are things like this, where I haven't even run it yet, but I have a lot of really useful information that doesn't get in my way. This used to be gigantic. The other is, I hinted at this before, so now in details, I do have history. I can go back to the last thing I looked at, I can go back to this thing, and I can clear my history if I want. Let's see.
What if you do?
Oh yeah.
If you do double question mark, does it pull up the code?
Actually, I was confused because I think that it's supposed to do that, but instead it does this. And this is clearly something that's coming from the back end, so I'm not sure what I'm missing.
Yeah. So what's going on there is that the time module is implemented as a shared library in C, so there's no source code to it.
Oh, it's native code. Okay.
In order to get the code, you have to be able to get the file, right?
So if I do this, what did I do?
Friends.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, parens. And then.
Okay, right. There's a source.
Yeah. So, right. So that's cool. I wonder what else to show. Oh yeah, one of the things I want to ask, right? So there are commands for doing that. Obviously, you can just turn it off if you want, if you're just not interested in it. There are menu items just for toggling it, but not switching its orientation, because I figured it's always going to be easier to come here anyway. You don't need 3 ways of doing it, but 2 is fine. Another thing is that I actually, so I partly modeled it on this thing, on the actual developer tools in Chrome. But so you'll see, like, this is actually the clear console, same thing here. But one thing I would suggest is that we stop using Shift Tab. Currently, I don't have a Shift Tab listener, and that's really useful because if I'm here and I hit Shift Tab, I actually want to unindent, which is what most text editors do. So I've actually set my keyboard control for toggling this thing to Command I, because the native browser one is Alt Command I. No, Shift Command I. No, not Shift. Alt, yeah.
Alt Command.
And I kind of modeled it on that, but we can pick anything really. It's just I would highly suggest not picking Shift Tab.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But tab is still bound to tab completion, so that obviously still works.
Right. Tab completion still works. So right. So that was a completion. PR. Yeah. So completion works the exact same way. It's just that tooltips are gone, so they will never contend with each other.
On the actual main content area.
That's right. Yeah. And yeah, go on.
Is there an easy keyboard shortcut to switch from details back to hints? Like if I'm
there. No, there isn't right now, but I could implement that, except that we have to be careful, because remember, we want this thing to be extensible, so we might want to have a keyboard shortcut that's something like switching tabs in the browser.
Right. Rotate through the tabs.
Yeah. So we might want to rotate inspector one. That's a good idea. The other thing is that I've tried really hard to show you the thing that you expect to see. So because now there's no detail up there, even though the history still exists, because there's no detail immediately asked for, I think what should happen if you didn't ask for one is that you should always see the hints, but obviously you might still want to go back. And actually you might be looking at this and looking for like inspiration or something, and also be like, oh wait, what's the signature for print? So switching through them in a keyboard way makes total sense to me.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I wonder.
That's it.
I think this is really cool. Well, can you keep sharing your screen? Can you?
Oh yeah, sure.
What I would think, did you think about making that a sidebar, an item in the sidebar, before putting it directly in the console? Because the other thing, you could still implement the orientation switching, because there is a bottom area in the application shell that you can put stuff in and remove it if you want to hide it. And so that could be an area that we leverage this, where it's either like a sidebar item or it's a item at the bottom of the entire shell. And then the second thing would be, instead of having the 2 tabs there for hints and details, what if you had like one toolbar for both, and then you had a button to show hints or a button to show details, and it was all in the same toolbar? rather than having another set of tabs?
I didn't think of the toolbar thing because I was in a tap frame of mind for some reason. In fact, the toolbar was a later addition when I realized I wanted more things there. But about putting it in the different parts of the actual application shell, one of the things is that this console example now also supports it. So I'd have to make it configurable, basically saying where do you want to attach this thing. Whereas right now, there's a console panel and it's self-contained. So my example page also runs the same stuff without me really having to do anything at all. But that's not really a good reason because it does live in JupyterLab. It doesn't live in examples.
So I would think that this would be a useful thing to show in the notebook as well, while someone's typing code in a notebook cell. So if we had like this shared instance of this thing that showed just whatever you're typing in at the time, whatever you're focused on, that's basically sending messages to this thing to display hints or display details, and then the person could open it or close it as they want. Then it works for all notebook type input.
Oh, so
and
you're
also another
one shared instance instead of per console or per notebook.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'd reload history or keep history around it wouldn't be switch activities.
I guess you could keep history. It's basically just whatever widget wants to opt into showing hints or details can throw effectively messages at this thing to show this hint, show this detail, and it's. I mean, you can keep history if you want or not. That could be another.
You could have the history persistent across documents. I mean, so each time you switch your active document, hints and details could show the latest things for that particular widget.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So you could have groups, you could have it associated with documents, or you could have it be, well, I mean, in the browser, it's definitely associated with your URL. If your URL changes, you'll have the same history, but it's history like it's like this kind of history, console history. It's not any sort of navigable history. So I think that navigable history should probably be purged at that point.
A few other things. So I think I really like this direction. I really do. I appreciate the thought you've been putting into it, and it's, I think, already an improvement. Other questions related to this. So I'm wondering if it's attached to the actual documents themselves, to the console and to individual notebooks, that if someone has multiple consoles and notebooks open, that having all of them have a hints and details attached to them is just going to get really busy. And you'd guarantee the user would pretty much only be able to work on one of those at a time. And so I probably agree with Chris that putting it in the side panel makes sense. The other thing about the vertical orientation is that you could do an accordion style tab system that would show the sort of more transient hints at the top and then have a separate accordion area at the bottom that shows details. So the user didn't have to even switch between the two, that as you type, you would see both the hints and the details.
You can't, though, because so many hints are this long.
Well, but obviously they would have to be scrollable. Both of those areas would have to be scrollable.
Okay, so you're saying to truncate like half of it or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because it's.
What's usually the difference between the hints and the details?
And what we could also have is if this would be like a sidebar, something in the sidebar, that's showing like transient stuff, and then if somebody's like wanting to see all of it in like a full screen view or something like that, we could even have a button to pop out the full hint in its own tab inside the central area, and then they can look at the whole thing and put whatever that, basically like just copy this content out and throw it in a tab that you can open or close or whatever. And so if it's a small hint, then they can scroll through it real quick, but if they want to see the whole thing, then they can pop that out into a bigger area.
Or if they want to keep it side by side with something. I mean, I can imagine people having a Julia and a Python console open, and they're trying to compare documentation or something, and being able to see side by side the documentation.
So the thing is that in terms of the busyness, that you might be worried about. It all sits inside. It all sits inside your one tab that you have open. So no matter how many consoles I have open, it's no busier than it would have been if it's in the sidebar. Like right now, I could have one.
But it is open two
now
consoles and consoles right next to each other.
Yeah, side by side.
Oh, okay. You're saying if I have them side by side. Okay, yeah, I get what you're saying now. That's the part I was sort of missing because this looks really silly.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay, yeah. I would totally wasn't
yeah.
envisioning that. That makes sense.
Yeah, and even that, like it's just you're losing a lot of screen real estate to display information that you pretty much only can really reasonably look at one copy of.
Well, I think I agree.
I bet there's a lot of times when it would be nice to see two different.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, like, I'm wondering if I actually can.
But most
like,
of the time, this is ephemeral.
So this use case though kind of ties into what I was talking about before, where if you wanted to view a bunch of documentation side by side, you can bring up the hint and then pull it out as its own tab. So we're not forcing the busyness and the sucking of screen real estate on everybody, but if they want to take up that space, then they could.
Okay.
Actually, Chris,
another thing that we've found from working with the existing notebook a lot is that a lot of us run the notebook in a mode where pager output is just treated as regular output. And part of what we found is that it's so painful to lose vertical scroll space in a notebook and in a console. Yeah. You almost never want something that's cutting down that vertical space.
Yeah. And well, that's why I had it here.
Other
that's why my default is to have it.
That helps, but then if you have that configuration and two consoles side by side, it really is. There's just not enough width on a laptop screen. And so I think that's some of the reason I'm thinking.
I totally didn't imagine that for like when you're working on something, you kind of have tunnel vision and you're seeing just this one, because I'm working on this one instance over and over, and that totally makes sense. What I would ask for is to have, now that there's a thing to base decisions off of, I would ask for some UX treatment of this and to actually post specific behaviors that we want, because this is me thinking about it for a while, but I don't want to be the one who makes a bunch of decisions and then receives a bunch of feedback and synthesizes that feedback into a coherent thing. I think if we got some UX treatment and we all sort of gave thumbs up or thumbs down to the various features, it would be a really helpful thing for me.
So I think what my suggestion would be.
Two questions.
Was someone else trying to comment?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, two questions. One, I was going to ask this actually separate from Chris, but it seems like a good point to bring it up. What about making it easy to drag stuff into and out of the sidebar? We had a case, I was having some conversation with somebody else where it would be nice if they could just take a widget that they were working on in the dock area and just drag it over and dock it into the sidebar. And of course, the case you just pointed out was undocking things from the sidebar, or at least making a copy of something in the sidebar. If we could drag it over to the running tab, drag an existing widget over to the running tab, and just docking whatever we wanted onto the sidebar, and then, like you said, dragging stuff out of the sidebar. I think that would be a really natural interaction.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And
that wouldn't be too hard to implement.
Yeah. So we need to make that sidebar, that side area, be dockable in the same way. And another thing we would do is we would pull, right now inspector is actually called console inspector, and I did that with the intention of being able to change it to be just inspector and used by others as well. And so pull inspector out, make it first class, and have that be a thing that also resides in the side area. I've made it pretty easy to add new inspectors. So for example, right now, the kernel inspect reply has a detail level argument, and there's 2 detail levels. So you could imagine hints and hints plus or something like that. So that somebody feels like writing, or like I was saying before, a debugger. So all those things need to be extensible, and I guess having them extended in one spot and having that one thing just be a first class introspection tool that notebooks and consoles use is a really helpful thing. And if we make everything sort of dislodgeable and redockable, then I guess you could take a specific hint and lodge it somewhere. But I want to make sure you can't take the entire hints tab. I think that's wrong. I think we probably want to take a specific hint, but I'm not sure. This is the sort of question that I think we need to resolve, basically. So I don't think I would be dragging this tab. I'm not sure. Actually. So really, like, do I want to drag this, or do I want to drag the entire hint mechanism? Do I want hints and details to be visible at the same time, like Brian was saying? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think, one question. Looking from the code, it looks like right now the content in the hints and details can be a MIME bundle.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that obviously right now the Python kernel doesn't send things other than just text, but it could be HTML.
Yes. That's right. So this is actually not truly text because it's got the ASCII color stuff in it from the console, but yeah, it's labeled as text plain.
Okay. So my thought for now is, because this is, I think, already an improvement over the existing treatment in master, let's put the exact UI you have there in the sidebar, the right sidebar, merge it, and then once it's there, I can have the students do a design pass, do some user review, basically spend more time on design. And I think also it will help for all of us to just play with it for a while and sit with it and see sort of how it feels.
Yeah.
And Darian, I have one suggestion.
It is an improvement already.
I have one suggestion. If you go to the details,
yes.
And do we still have history here? Can we put some history in there?
Sure.
So one of the things that I can see pretty immediately is that, putting some history in there. I think it's fantastic that you're saving the history. That's a brilliant idea. Cycling through it with it's brilliant. Cycling through it with the arrows, I think, will quickly get boring or tedious, and making out a drop down that just has the one word label or whatever was being looked up at that point, make it a lot easier to scroll through those and find the details that I'm looking for.
So actually, what Steve showed me was the Spider version, and that's exactly what Spider's doing. The thing is, I didn't know what the label should be. Should the label be I ? Because what if my code looks like this? What's my label now? How do I know what the label is?
Well, I mean, what shows up in the details at that point? Sorry, nothing showed up in the details, right?
No, the details didn't change because I actually had the same value.
Oh, okay.
So here.
So you're sending that entire block of code to the kernel to get this, get the details?
Send the whole block of code to the kernel, but you tell the kernel where your cursor is. Actually, in this case, you don't even do that. This is a regular execution reply. Sorry. In hint.
Maybe the kernel should send back the relevant title. I mean, it should say, out of this whole block of text, here's the thing that I'm showing you about, and here's all the information.
I mean, that would be great. But without that, I don't have enough information to make a choice.
I mean,
I guess I could say the last line. I could definitely say, give me the last line of code.
My guess is a drop-down box will be a lot easier to navigate than the arrows. And if anything, a drop-down box lets you skip to an entry instead of navigate through all the entries.
Yeah, and in fact, what's annoying is if there are double entries, I don't have a good way of checking against double entries either. So the arrows are particularly annoying with double entries.
Right.
And if I had those strings, I could detect double entries actually. But without those strings, I can't really compare widgets and say, is this widget the same as that widget without doing something expensive, so I didn't bother.
We should make a list. We should make a list of messaging spec things. we have, I think, a backlog of messaging spec suggestions.
Well, actually,
so this would be one.
This is relevant because this is the pager, and pager is deprecated, so it's not even. In fact, we don't even have interfaces in iKernel for this. I wrote it without those interfaces because I didn't think we should add the deprecated stuff in there. But
yeah, over time we're trying to move pager output to just regular output. Now the tooltip stuff is separate, but like IPython already has a configuration point that reroutes pager output from being a separate message type to just regular output.
Okay.
And a lot of us run IPython in that mode, and we never ever use the pager. Now, obviously, I think for feature parity, until we formally deprecate the pager, we probably do need to support it. But your current UI would easily follow that transition and not have a problem with that.
Well, how would it though? If it looks like regular output, how would I know its details?
It just appears in that cell.
Right,
it literally
but
just appears right below the
no,
question mark.
I understand, but I don't want it in that cell. I want it in my inspector. How do I get it there?
But I think that's what we're finding is that as we've used the pager in its current implementation, there's a very strong feeling that people don't want it to be separate. That everyone really, and part of it is that a lot of us end up writing documents, and we want to show the doc string in the document that we're sharing with people.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. The pager output is never included in the document. And so if you want to say, now let's look at the doc string of this scikit-learn model, it's not in the document. And I think that's one reason why people are wanting to move the pager from a separate thing to just regular output. But that's sort of beside the point, because today it's still like we haven't gotten rid of it officially, and we probably do need to have some UI for it.
Right. Okay.
And so, I think this is going to be the type of thing that we'll have to keep iterating on. But I do think this is definitely an improvement. And I think if we sort of move it to the right sidebar and then merge, we can have the designers start to do some UX work around this.
So, running tab exists always. I guess should the inspector tab also just always exist, and whichever is the active console or notebook register, like just talks to it? Is that how we should deal with this?
Yeah, that's my thought. I don't think we should explicitly open the inspector. Like I think users should have to click on it to open it. But I think basically the inspector content should, that different widgets should be able to send content to the inspector, and the inspector should, and we'll have to think about how to interleave the content from different documents. Like we may want to clear it when you switch to active documents. We'll just have to play with that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. +1 for merging. I see it's a huge amount of code right now.
Yeah. No, that's
and iterating.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, can we merge it without that and just do that as a separate PR? But I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm totally fair.
Yep.
Okay. Because that would actually be a bunch of refactoring anyway, so I would prefer to just have something in there.
Has
Cool.
anybody reviewed the code or looked at it?
I mean,
I was
we're
current
looking
as
at a
of
lot.
this morning.
Okay.
So like I don't mean like this second. Obviously, like I can wait till Monday.
Right. I was just curious if one of us should jump into it or somebody who's already keeping up with the code changes.
Yeah. So I mean, Steve's been keeping up to some extent, but I don't know if he's seen the latest because a lot of new stuff went in. And I'm always happy to have multiple eyes on things.
Yeah.
Because now people are watching what we do. So the nicer it is, the better we all look.
And then also, I think the other thing you could add, and that the follow-on pull request is enabling this for the notebook as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, yeah, with those changes, I think it would be great for all of us to play with it, to, yeah, see what it feels like in practice.
Cool.
I'm really excited.
Great.
Good work.
Yeah,
Thank you.
really, it's awesome.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I'm done.
Is there anything else that we've seen a lot of work? I triaged a bunch of issues. Sorry if I triaged it wrong, but I've been trying to keep track of what needs work and what's finished and what's sprint friendly to Cal Poly, etc. So feel free to update those. Are the Cal Poly students, are they members of the project? Can they update statuses and things like that?
I'll have to look. I don't think they are. So
okay.
Yeah, it would probably make sense to add that.
Yep.
So I have something I'd like to talk about, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Or fields for questions and comments. For those of you that were around in the very, very early days of FOSPR had its own internal implementation of a virtual DOM, which I've been toying around with the idea of reviving a small part of that to help provide a default way of rendering leaf content for widgets. Because I think, Brian, you mentioned that some of the Cal Poly students' feedback was, how do I create leaf content? And so I don't think it's out of the purview of FOSPR to provide some at least default way of doing that. And so what I'm thinking about doing is not changing how all widgets are rendered. Like a widget will still be a wrapper around a DOM node that you can provide. But if you wanted to create a custom widget with custom content, all you would have to do is re-implement your onUpdateRequest method and render some virtual DOM content into that thing. So you wouldn't even need like a dedicated render widget. There would be no components like you get in React. Basically, if anyone's familiar with React, it would be basically like pure functional components, if you will. Like, so the stuff that you render with a virtual DOM doesn't have any lifecycle methods associated with it, right? Like the lifecycle method is at the granularity of a widget, and then you can just render whatever content you want, whatever leaf content you want using the virtual DOM. And so if you wanted to nest widgets, you nest widgets, and then at the very leaf level, you can render with virtual DOM if you want. Like that's just something that we provide. Again, you wouldn't have to use it. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is that I'm now moving on bringing all this stuff from Phosphide into FOSPR, and one of the things that I'm bringing over is a sidebar, which is very similar to a tab bar, except it's designed to go on the side of things rather than the top or the bottom of things. It has a little bit of a simpler structure, and it doesn't support dragging around tabs or detaching them or anything like that. And so as I move to try to separate out the common functionality of those two things into a base class to reduce code duplication, I started getting some questions about how to define the renderer for that thing and whatnot. And so as I was starting to dig into this, if you look at the pattern we're using now, for example, like tabbar.iRender, you see or menubar.iRender, you see a common thread, which is where we have a create node method, which creates the node using raw DOM node using the regular DOM APIs, and then later I'll call an update node method on that same renderer class to update something in place, and then all the widgets internally are maintaining their own dirty sets and those sorts of things. And so all of that could become a lot simpler by just having a render node method or something like that and pass in the information you need. And so then you only have one thing to implement for a renderer. It would still be consistent across all of our regular widgets and provide everybody else a way to create easier way to create DOM leaf content if they wanted. So I kind of wanted to. That's a lot to say. So now that that's out there, kind of wanted to get what everyone's feedback is on that, whether they're for that, against that, if they would rather have a non-virtual API for that kind of stuff, or just basically get people's opinions on it.
Yeah, so a couple questions. So this virtual renderer could, so a widget that rendered its content using that approach could have a model, and it could inject values from the model into that virtual DOM tree. And so, I mean, literally, it could be as simple as that model has a state change method, and it just throws the model at the virtual, like it. I'm trying to understand sort of.
Yeah, exactly. Correct. You're correct.
So we could use that type of data flow. It sounds like the main constraint that this has is that the content rendered by one of these widgets could not intermix virtual DOM elements like divs and spans and other phosphor widgets.
Correct.
It would be pure leaf content.
Yes.
And so in this case, I think that constraint probably makes sense. I think the complexity that we would face, I mean, it would be back to where it was when we looked at that before, where it's really hard to sort of dynamically mix those two models in an arbitrarily nested way.
Yeah.
So why, playing devil's advocate, there's tons of virtual DOM libraries out there. Some are pretty small. I know that you had done some benchmarking early on. I know your code was pretty decent early on and everything, but devil's advocate says why not use Mithril or Vue or one of some of these other virtual DOM libraries? I haven't looked at what's current this week, but is it to avoid dependencies?
Yeah, it'd be another dependency, which would be larger than the 800 or so lines that the small virtual DOM implementation is. So this would keep Phosphor self-contained without needing extra dependencies and relying on, finding bugs and other people's stuff that takes time to fix and this, that, and the other. Plus, I already had all the typing definitions exhaustively pulled out from the IDL spec in TypeScript, so we can use all these in a fully type-safe way.
Right.
Basically, it exists, and pulling out, re-pulling that stuff out on the parts that I want is less work than writing the full typings for another library and figuring out which one we want to use and wading through licensing issues and all the other stuff.
Right. And it certainly doesn't prevent people from using it, like we've always said.
Correct.
Brian, you're muted.
Sorry. Let's say someone had leaf content that they're rendering this way, and they wanted to do things like trigger events, like click events and hover events on some of those actual DOM nodes. What would our model be? How people target that type of stuff?
Yes. So the attributes object that you can pass to these virtual nodes also includes type-safe definitions for the inline event listeners. So the simplest way to just be add a function for the inline event listener, which use a fat arrow function, which you calls back into whatever you want. That's the easy way. The other way would be to attach an event listener on the widget itself. For events that bubble, you can just attach the event listener on the widget itself, like we typically do, and then do your own hit testing on your DOM structure on those events to figure out what triggered the event. So really not much changes with respect to that versus what we currently do. The only thing is that for events that do not bubble, of which they think there's like 4, you would have to use inline event listeners, which I don't think is too onerous.
Can you still attach event listeners like on before attach on the actual node and just do check the target and that sort of thing? Like, is that still available to you?
Yeah, that's another way of saying what I was just saying, where you do the same thing we're doing now and allow it to bubble up to the widget level and then parse it from there.
Okay, cool.
It'd be interesting if we could employ the JSX syntax as well. I don't even know if I would prefer it or not, but it'd be an interesting experiment to see if we could use the TypeScript JSX syntax. Maybe people writing the virtual DOM widgets would really like to use it, and it would just compile down to Phosphor virtual DOM instead of a React.
Yeah, that would be a decision we'd probably want to make up front so that I have the code to support that transformation.
So I have a question. One, this is going to expose some of my ignorance. What's the model? So these virtual DOM nodes, in the virtual DOM API, how do you add classes? And this is something that it's my understanding that JSX has a funky notation for adding classes that confuses a lot of people, and it'd be nice to have a clean way of adding classes to these nodes. And yeah,
that JSX. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it's just a property on the attributes you pass into the constructor. So you have like div, and then you pass it an object, which is a bag of attributes, and one of those is class name, and that's just the string, and you can produce that string however you want.
Okay.
And the only reason it's weird is because class is a reserved keyword, so they couldn't put it in JSX. So they call it class name, and that's mainly what confuses people, is because it looks like HTML, but it has this thing called class name instead of class.
Yeah, and in JavaScript, when you're dealing with the DOM node APIs anyway, the attribute is the property on the node object is class name, not class, because this class is a reserved word.
Yep. Okay. So
there's a couple instances of those where we handle it. The virtual DOM does have to change the name from the regular IDL spec because of the JavaScript reserved words.
Yeah. I mean, in our context, I think one thing that, and maybe again it's a question, is how would our adoption of JSX affect our ability to be type safe? I don't know the answer.
I think that all bets are off in JSX in terms of type safety, which is one reason to prefer the way that I've structured things now, which is all with type safe function calls. And to be clear, it's much better than like doing like create element and then passing in a string. Like there's actually a function called div, and there's a function called a and whatnot to create these elements. So it's not very onerous to write this stuff in JS.
I think we should. My initial thought is let's see what the syntax looks like that you have, and then make a call about if we're interested in JSX or something. I'm hesitant to only support JSX.
Oh, no. Yeah, I was thinking optionally. Like it would be interesting to see if it's possible, but you're right about the types it looks like. I'm reading the TypeScript doc on JSX, and it says it's typed as any. You can customize it, but it's not possible to retrieve type information about the element attributes or children. It's black box. Literally says that it is a black box in the doc. So, yeah, I mean, it would be an interesting idea to explore. A more concerning question to me is timeline-wise. You saw we put a monorepo status blocked label on issues. We're starting to accumulate more and more issues. Do you see this refactoring as blocking 1.0, or do you see it as?
No, it's not. Okay. It's not a refactoring. I won't update. I'll use this to make the sidebar, and then post releasing 0.9 or whatever it is with Phosphide.
Okay.
I'll start merging those concepts and repeating it in other places.
Got it. Okay. So refactoring work happens after.
What's that?
Okay. The refactoring work happens after. Okay.
Yeah. So this is just pulling stuff out of hibernation and getting it to work.
Yeah. I mean, I think we definitely need something in this space, and I think I have looked some at some of the other virtual DOM renderers that are sort of very lightweight, and the one thing that I encountered when I sat down to start to integrate them with Phosphor is I realized that I was going to have to spend some amount of time impedance mismatching the different events that those models had with the events that Phosphor exposes, like the on, before, attach, etc., and deal with the fact that obviously those models typically don't support the full set of events that Phosphor does. And I don't know, it was enough of an impedance mismatch that my 10-minute experiment was like, it sort of stopped and realized, yeah, like we probably need to think about how we want to do this in a way that is super simple for users. And so if it's not a lot of code, I think it would be worth having an out-of-the-box solution that just worked.
Yeah, and the key too is that I'm not changing anything in the fundamentals of widget. Like widget is still just a wrapper around a raw DOM node. And if you want to use this little small tiny virtual DOM that we have to render content into a widget, then you can. If you don't, you can still use whatever you want. Like for example, I'm still going to have, like for tab bar or things that are creating custom, like split panel, for example, that creates custom handle nodes. Like I'm not going to render those with the virtual DOM because that's overkill. I don't need to. I just need to create a regular DOM node. So that renderer is still going to use the regular DOM API to do that, just the same way I'm going to use a regular DOM API to create the skeleton of a tab bar. But we can render the tabs themselves with virtual DOM because that gets rid of all of the dirty state managing that I have to do in the tab bar.
Okay.
So that kind of stuff. So it's, you'll see it being selectively used within the core widgets, but you'll also see me using the regular DOM APIs as well when it makes sense. So it's really just like, this is a tool, use it if it makes sense. We don't force it on anybody.
The other place where I've run into this stuff is I'm starting to think about having a common set of UI controls that are like buttons and button drop downs and text input areas. And I think that our implementation of those, we probably want to be widgets that have signals that fire on various things. But inside those, I think that a lot of the virtual rendering ideas would be really simple and work really well.
So in this case, I would say it would be a mistake to make a button its own widget. That's just overkill. Like you don't need that much life cycle management for a button. Like button can now just become a function that takes a data model and returns like a virtual DOM node. And then anybody can use that function call to render a button into their own content widget wherever they want. The same thing with the dropdown. Like it could just take a data structure or a data model and maybe some function callbacks.
I mean, part of what we're running into is more sort of encapsulating the visual design of those elements. And that's where having them be widget classes allows us to add all the right CSS classes. But I don't know. I mean, there's definitely things to think about there. Obviously, rendering a button with a virtual DOM makes no sense, especially because there's no state there. But I think there are other stateful UI controls where the virtual DOM approach would make sense and simplify some things.
Just wanted to add a vote of confidence. I used the virtual DOM when it was in Phosphor originally, and it was pretty nice. I mean, it worked well. It worked consistently with the rest of Phosphor.
Okay. Well, Jason, do you think thumbs up on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit sad to see it go, and writing to the DOM API, and then I've been having conversations with others that are doing, leaf content in HTML, and even some of the people on GitHub and stuff like that have been looking at doing leaf content in HTML. That it's a bit of a pain. We all knew that, but having a virtual DOM API or something like that would be good.
Okay, yeah, I'm also thumbs up on it. So
cool. That's it for me then.
Is there anybody else?
I've been again lost in administrative stuff for most of the week. I'm in the process of sort of meeting with the students, and we're going to start to process all the user testing stuff and sort of identify what the students are going to be working on next based on that. In the meantime, I think a lot of them are sort of helping out and working on different things. No particular updates on sort of what's next with that though until we go through the user test results more. I think the only other discussion point is sort of I opened up an issue on JupyterLab number 507. Oh. Well, maybe I opened up. No. So well, I'll just bring up the question, and that is sort of what interactions do we want to have for the command palette? See if I can find the issue.
Yeah, it's 507.
447.
Oh, 447. 507 is make command palette a modal dialog.
Yeah, this is separate. So I'll
Okay.
so right now when you do Command Shift P to open the command palette, it focuses the search field, and so you can type. But there's no, if you press return, the command runs, but there's no visual indication the command was run. And so I myself, and I've seen other users sit there and keep pressing return, and it does the thing multiple times. And so and part of the reason is that the search field is still populated, and the selected item that you ran for the command is still selected. And so my first proposal was, let's clear the search field and unselect the command that was run to indicate that a command was run. The next is that after you run a command, you can't get back to what you were doing without using the mouse. So if you are working on a notebook and you do Command Shift P to do something, you can't keep typing in the notebook. You have to literally go back and mouse click the notebook. And so
I have a direct response to that point.
Yeah, go for it.
And one is that in general, that's not something that would be that the command palette knows how to do, because it doesn't know what activity you are working on. But more than that, even if it did know what activity you were working on, it would be inappropriate for the command palette to do, because the command could have changed focus. And so the corollary of that is that if you're executing a command like cut the previous cell, then that command should probably put focus on the notebook, because that is now what your semantic action is. And so we should rely on the commands after they execute, that if there should be a semantic activity change, then it's the responsibility of the command to do that. And so preparing for that line of workflow, the command palette focuses the input field and selects before it executes the command. So in the event that the command does change focus, the command palette doesn't steal focus back, which would happen if it set focus to itself after the command executed. And so yeah, we're retaining focus and selection on the input field of the command palette in preparation in the event that the command, when it does execute, changes focus. So I think basically the answer is that we need to be more judicious in our setting of focus from command execution handlers.
Okay, but we could clear the search field before command.
We could. The reason we don't is because Sublime doesn't, and that's just the decision we made at the time. So if you open the command palette and you execute a command in Sublime, it dismisses the palette, but then if you open the palette again, you'll notice that your old text was there and it's completely selected. So we just
hold on. I'm seeing what.
So one other thing is that if your command palette is hidden on the side, pressing the shortcut to get the command palette reflow everything, and I would expect that once you execute something, you would get back to your initial view, because I don't see any case where user would like to invoke a command palette which is hidden and have it still there afterward.
So Visual Studio Code.
I agree with you, Matthias, but because with the command palette in the left panel, if we hide the command palette after it runs, you may have just hidden the files that the user was looking at. Like in other words, the user may have the file browser open, and if you do Command Shift P and then we hide it, then obviously
no. But what I'm saying is would there be a way to detect whether the thing was like basically restores the previous state? Like either there are two things. One, if you have the file browser and invoke the command palette, when you leave the command palette, your file browser is gone. And the second thing is if the side panel is completely hidden, you basically pop it up and slide it back, so you have a true reflow of the notebook. So would there be a way to have a command palette which, when it's hidden, when you invoke it with Ctrl-Shift-P, is floating? If it's hidden, you get a floating windows, whatever floating means.
Oh, you mean like a drop-down dialog?
Like
rather
what?
than the sidebar, like the drop down rather than the sidebar.
Yes, yes, or even sidebar, but that doesn't reflow everything. Like what shouldn't, like something that appears and disappears without changing the layout of the page.
I mean,
whatever
maybe,
whatever the UI is exactly.
Yeah, so we were in the very beginning, we were debating whether to make the command palette like a temporary thing that drops down from the center, or make it a sidebar item that kind of pops out and pops back in. And I kind of voted for the sidebar one because I don't like how Sublime, when I'm doing the command palette, like blocks the text that I'm looking at, because oftentimes the command that I'm looking for is related to the text that I'm typing. And so by it opening over by text, now I'm like, what text am I? And so that's why I went for something for the sidebar. But again, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Clearly, some people don't like the sidebar approach and they'd rather have the drop down. So maybe the conversation we should be having is whether the command palette is really ephemeral enough that, you know, a drop down is the right way to do it. And like, I'll just be in the minority of people where I deal with it covering my text.
Well,
I mean, I don't see.
There's also, you know, Emacs and VI both pop up the command palette essentially from the bottom. And so that's less reflow because it's more taking away vertical space than reflowing. But popping it up from the bottom is another option.
I think that if the command palette is already shown, it's a perfectly good, like if someone have a sidebar with command palette, having Control-Shift-P focusing this one is a perfect, reasonable things to do because it's already there and it won't reflow. The thing is that annoys me is if the command palette is not already visible. So we could have Control-Shift-P that does a slightly different action depending on whether the side panel is already there or not there.
Yeah, so you're saying have two command palettes, one in the sidebar, and if that one's not visible, then Command-Shift-P opens the drop-down version.
How many people in user testing and stuff, I guess they probably weren't familiar with the command palette, but how many people keep the command palette open?
We need to.
Or
how often
do you keep the command palette open? Like in normal flow, versus just popping it in and popping it back out?
I mean, before we had a menu bar, I always had the command palette open because it was the only way to do a lot of things.
That's true. Good point. It was the menu bar.
We'll look at the results of the user tests. I think it's not obvious to me. I'm right now probably 50-50 on sidebar versus modal drop-down style command palette. My thought is that let's improve what we have now, and I think we can make a few very small changes to the interaction and see if it's good enough and keep iterating. The two big changes I think we should make, though, is that Command-Shift-P is currently tied to the toggle command. And so if the command palette's already open and you do Command-Shift-P, it collapses it. Totally weird. It should be activate rather than toggle. And the other is that I think we should clear the search field when a command is run, so the user knows that they ran a command. And so let's do those two things and see if it improves, and if not, keep iterating.
I think it would make sense to blink maybe once or something like that, the command that's being run.
I have to take this call, sorry.
So if you just blink the command, or some indication of which command was actually selected and run. Or you can make it slowly bounce from the sidebar. Just kidding.
I'm okay with blinking. Seems great.
I mean, chapter, if you grab another one that I can maybe do, once I move. Just all the normal density.
Should we wait for Brian to come back, or do we want to continue talking about something else?
Anything else? Steve, Carol?
Just, as a casual user, I would leave the command palette open. But I have the real estate on the screen to do so. So I don't
think
have
everyone 35-inch screens.
Well, but then also I don't use it enough to memorize the shortcuts. I'm not a shortcut person. Welcome to Cal Poly.
Sorry, guys, I got it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Carol.
No, but I mean, I think it's easy enough if I can click it open or closed and just have it the way I want it. It doesn't really matter to me what state it starts in.
Yeah, I think if it's open right now, except for the issue Ryan raised that it actually toggles the command palette, there is no issue. The issue for people that actually want it to be hidden, we need to find a slightly more sensible behavior. I think it's perfectly fine if we don't fix that right now, but in the 1.0, and for some workflow, I think it's important to not reflow and have something which is more out of your way.
I kind of really would like to experiment with making it a mode line, like an Emacs or a VI, and float on top of, have suggestions float on top of the bottom portion of the screen, but the text actually be at the bottom. Anyway, there's things that we can experiment with.
Is there a way to, I guess there is a way to replace the command palette by another plugin. So it might be a question of actually our implementation will be the default and say, hey, you want something which is really more Emacs-like or more Sublime-like.
Feel free to
you
do
have
it.
alternate plugins that switch that. And then we punt on the designing a new UI.
Yep. Okay, anything else?
Right, there is actually a plugin that adds it explicitly to the side panel, so we could just replace that with something else.
Just a note on so I tagged lots of things need discussion. If you want to discuss things or jump into some of the discussions that are happening, look at the issues. If I tagged a lot of things as help wanted. Anything that didn't look like somebody was actively working on it, I tagged as help wanted. So there might be a queue list for Cal Poly. And anyway, so there's two places to look for places that need feedback or need discussion to keep things moving.
Just a note, I was informed today that out of all the video talks at SciPy 2016 on YouTube, the JupyterLab talk is the most viewed by over a factor of 2.
It's also the first talk in the series on their landing page. That might have something to do with it. Not saying that you guys aren't awesome.
I think those are sorted by popularity. Yeah, by number of views.
Congratulations.
I think it's also made it to PyCoders Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter about Python. I think it's one of the first new JupyterLab, and the link is, I don't remember if it's a blog or the post. We will probably have more view.
So I'm planning on giving essentially that talk or an updated version of that talk at PyData DC in the second week of October. So October 7th through 8th or something like that. And then, of course, we have Strata coming up at the end of September, where we plan on giving some sort of JupyterLab type talk. So I guess we'll keep updating that talk, and the materials are up, but we should put more polished materials up for whoever else is giving a talk that wants to talk about JupyterLab.
I'll be giving a talk at PyData SF on JupyterLab, so I could definitely use some help.
More polished materials. When are you giving it?
Like August 13th, I think.
Okay,
6th?
so I think you're the first one up. Okay.
Let's work together on that.
We need to polish our materials before you give that talk. Okay, sounds good.
I may also be at Jupyter Days Atlanta on the same date, giving the same talk.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, there you go. You
That's
two
CBD.
can follow it up.
maybe we can synchronize.
But we've got a lot of good updates, like the draggable outputs and stuff like that. That'll be extra wow factor. I think every time we give this talk, we'll have one more extra wow factor that'll be interesting for people that have seen the other talks.
Cool.
Okay. I think that's it. So
kind of the Steve Jobs. One more thing.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, here's the talk, and then one more thing. Somebody that didn't know anything about JupyterLab or TypeScript did this in 2 hours yesterday night, or whatever, and then blow them away.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.